Clara Bennett's morning began like any other in the quiet town of Maplewood, just outside Seattle. The sun had barely risen, painting the sky with a soft golden hue, and the world was calm, too calm for what was about to happen. She stood in her front yard, watering the small flower garden she had planted years ago with her late husband, Ethan. The lavender swayed gently in the breeze, and the scent of damp earth filled the air. It was one of those peaceful mornings that reminded her of simpler times, before loss had taken root in her heart. Clara adjusted the garden hose and smiled, faintly, remembering how Ethan used to tease her about talking to plants. "They grow faster when you love them," he'd say with a grin, wiping his hands on his jeans after fixing the fence or mowing the lawn. She missed that voice, that easy laughter that filled their home. Even after 3 years without him, the ache hadn't faded. It had just settled into a quiet corner of her soul. She turned off the hose and reached for the small silver watering can sitting by the porch steps. That's when she noticed it. Her hand felt strangely light. Her eyes darted down, her heart skipping a beat. The wedding ring was gone. Her fingers trembled as she turned her hand over again and again, disbelief washing through her like cold rain. "No. No. Please no," she whispered, scanning the ground in panic. She set the watering can aside and crouched low, running her fingers through the grass, her eyes wide and frantic. The ring wasn't just gold and metal. It was a symbol of her life with Ethan. Every scratch, every small dent in that band held a story, a memory. Losing it felt like losing him all over again. She searched the porch first, then the steps, then the small patch of gravel beside the garden. The more she looked, the faster her heart raced. Her mind started replaying the morning. She'd made coffee, fed her cat, stepped outside to water the plants. She hadn't gone far. It had to be here somewhere. Still, the grass only gave her small fragments of dry leaves and twigs. The air felt heavier now, the early calm replaced by an uneasy stillness. Clara's breath came in short bursts, her knees damp from the ground as she searched. A familiar lump formed in her throat, and tears blurred her vision. "Please," she whispered to no one. "Just let me find it." That's when a voice startled her. "Clara? Everything okay?" She turned, blinking through the sunlight, and saw Jake Carter, her next-door neighbor. He was standing near the hedge that divided their yards, holding a mug of coffee, his brown hair slightly tousled. Jake had moved to Maplewood about a year ago. He was quiet, but kind, the type who helped people without making a big deal about it. Clara quickly wiped her eyes, embarrassed. I lost something," she said softly. He stepped closer, concern written on his face. "What did you lose?" "My wedding ring," she murmured. "It must have slipped off while I was out here." Jake's expression softened instantly. "Do you want me to help you look?" She hesitated. Part of her wanted to say no, not wanting to trouble anyone. But her voice cracked as she whispered, "Please." Jake nodded and set his coffee cup on the porch railing. He began searching the ground beside her, moving carefully, scanning every inch with quiet focus. For a long while, the only sounds were the soft rustle of grass and the occasional chirp of a bird overhead. After a few minutes, he spoke gently. "Did you check near the flower beds?" Clara nodded. "Twice. I even dug a little, just in case." Jake knelt beside her, brushing the soil gently with his fingers. "Don't worry," he said, his tone calm and steady. "We'll find it." His certainty made her want to believe him. Together, they checked the porch steps, the walkway, even the small patch near the mailbox. But as the minutes turned into hours, hope began to fade. By late afternoon, Clara sat on the porch steps, her hands folded tightly in her lap. Her eyes were red from crying, her heart heavy. "It's gone," she said quietly. It's really gone. Jake sat beside her, resting his elbows on his knees. Maybe it just needs time, he said softly. Sometimes things turn up when we least expect them. Clara looked at him, her expression weary. It's not just a ring, she said, her voice trembling. It's the last piece of him I had left. I've already lost so much. I don't know if I can lose this too. Jake didn't speak right away. He just nodded slowly, his eyes filled with quiet understanding. Then he said, I don't think you've lost him, Clara. People we love, they don't disappear with time or with things. They stay. Maybe not the way we want them to, but they stay. His words lingered in the air, wrapping around her like warmth. For a moment, the ache in her chest softened. She hadn't realized how long it had been since someone spoke to her with that kind of kindness. Not pity, not sympathy, but genuine care. The sky began to fade into shades of pink and orange, the sun sinking behind the houses. Clara sighed, brushing dirt off her hands. Thank you for helping Jake, she said softly. You didn't have to spend your day doing this. He smiled faintly. You'd do the same for me. She smiled, small but real. Maybe. He stood, brushing off his jeans. If it doesn't show up, I can bring over a metal detector tomorrow. I have one in the garage. You'd be surprised how many times it's saved me from losing things. Clara looked up at him, surprised by his thoughtfulness. You'd really do that? Of course, he said. I like a good mystery. That earned a small laugh from her, quiet but genuine. It was the first time she'd laughed in weeks. As Jake walked back to his house, Clara watched him go, her heart heavy, yet strangely lighter than before. She couldn't explain it, but something about his presence had eased the pain, even if only a little. He had shown up when she needed, someone most, not to fix her grief, but to remind her that she wasn't completely alone in it. When the evening air grew cool, Clara sat on her porch and stared at the fading horizon. The ring was still gone, but the world didn't feel as empty as it had that morning. She thought about Jake's words, that people we love stay with us, even when they're gone. As the stars began to appear, Clara whispered softly into the night, I'll find it, Ethan. Somehow. But deep down, she knew the ring wasn't the only thing she had lost, and perhaps not the only thing she was meant to find again. Somewhere, inside her heart, something fragile but hopeful stirred, a feeling she hadn't felt in years. And without knowing it, the story of what she lost and what she was about to find had just begun. The next morning, Clara woke up with tired eyes, but a tiny spark of hope. The house was quiet, except for the faint hum of the refrigerator and the gentle ticking of the clock in the living room. She had barely slept, her mind replaying the events of yesterday. The lost ring, the search, and Jake's kind voice saying, We'll find it. By the time she stepped outside, the air was cool, fresh, and smelled of dew. Her garden glistened under the soft morning light, and she wondered again if her ring might be hidden somewhere in that patch of green. She crouched down and searched for a few minutes before hearing footsteps on the gravel path. Morning, Clara, Jake called out cheerfully. He was holding a small black case and a thermos. Brought some help. Clara blinked in surprise. You weren't joking about the metal detector? He grinned, kneeling beside her. Told you, I like mysteries. And besides, I couldn't stop thinking about that ring. Want to give it another try? She hesitated but nodded, smiling faintly. All right, let's do it. Jake opened the case and took out a metal detector, a sleek, professional-looking one that buzzed softly when he turned it on. He handed her the thermos. Coffee, strong. You'll need it. She accepted it gratefully. You really came prepared. He gave a playful shrug. I'm an engineer. We like tools. For the next hour, the two of them worked side by side, scanning every inch of her yard. Jake moved carefully, sweeping the detector in steady arcs, while Clara followed behind, brushing the soil whenever it beeped. Every sound sent her heart racing, only for her to find bottle caps, small coins, or broken nails. Still, she refused to give up. As they worked, small moments of laughter began to break through the silence. When the detector beeped near the garden fence, Jake leaned over and said, "If this turns out to be your ring, I'm officially retiring as a neighborhood hero." Clara laughed softly. "And if it's another nail?" "Then I'm changing careers. Maybe detective work isn't for me." Their laughter felt easy, natural, something Clara hadn't felt in a long time. For months after Ethan's death, she had built a quiet wall around herself. Neighbors checked in, friends called, but she always smiled politely and said she was fine. Jake somehow didn't push or pry. He simply showed up, steady and patient, like a gentle reminder that kindness still existed. After a while, they decided to take a break. Clara poured more coffee into 2 mugs and handed one to Jake as they sat on the porch steps. The morning sun was brighter now, and the neighborhood was waking up. Children riding bikes, dogs barking in the distance, a mail truck humming down the street. "You know," Jake said, taking a sip, "I think that ring meant more to you than most people would understand." Clara looked down, turning the mug in her hands. "It's silly, maybe. It's just a piece of jewelry. But Ethan gave it to me after his first big job promotion. We couldn't afford much back then, but he said it wasn't about the price. It was about what it meant." Her voice softened. "It was the promise that we'd face everything together." Jake nodded quietly. "Sounds like he was a good man." "He was," she whispered. "He really was." A long silence followed. The wind rustled through the trees, carrying the faint sound of distant laughter. Then Jake said, "You know, sometimes losing something precious makes space for something new. Doesn't mean it replaces what was lost. Just that life keeps finding ways to remind us it's still worth living." Clara met his gaze, her chest tightening at the sincerity in his eyes. "You sound like someone who's been through loss too." He smiled faintly. "Maybe. My younger brother a few years ago. Car accident. It changed everything for my family. That's why I moved here, actually. Needed a quieter place." Her heart softened instantly. "I'm so sorry, Jake." He shook his head gently. "Thanks, but you know, the funny thing is, grief never really leaves. It just teaches you to see things differently. Like, how moments matter more than plans." Clara nodded. For the first time in years, she felt truly seen. Not pitied, not fixed, just understood. They talked a while longer about small things. His job designing solar panels, her love for gardening, the book club she never went back to after Ethan died. Slowly, the conversation drifted from sadness to laughter again. When they resumed the search, Jake walked toward the small patch near the backyard fence. The detector beeped faintly, and both of them froze. "Wait," Clara whispered. "Did you hear that?" Jake grinned. "I definitely heard that." He waved her back slightly and started digging gently with his hands. After a few moments, the sunlight glinted off something buried in the soil. Clara gasped. Jake held it up carefully. A small gold ring, dusty but unmistakable. "I think we found your mystery." Her breath caught in her throat. "Oh my God. That's it." She reached out, tears springing to her eyes. The ring was scratched and a bit muddy, but the engraving inside, E+C, forever, was still there. Her hands trembled as she clutched it to her chest. "I can't believe it. You found it," Jake smiled, brushing dirt from his palms. "Told you I'd help." Clara's eyes shimmered with gratitude. "I don't even know how to thank you." "Start with dinner," he said playfully. "I make a mean pasta, but I'll let you take the credit." She laughed through her tears. "You're impossible." "Persistent," he corrected with a grin. As the sun began to dip lower in the sky, Clara cleaned the ring and placed it back on her finger. It felt like a missing piece of her heart had returned. Not just because of the ring itself, but because of what the day had given her. A moment of kindness, connection, and maybe a quiet beginning. That night, after Jake left, Clara stood by her kitchen window, holding her hand up to the light. The ring glowed softly under the lamp, and she smiled. Then she looked toward Jake's house. His porch light was still on. She didn't know why, but she felt something shift deep inside her. Something gentle, something new. Her heart, which had stayed silent for so long, had started to stir again. And though she didn't want to admit it yet, she knew Jake had changed something in her, something she didn't even know needed changing. The next few days passed with an unusual calm around Clara's house. After finding her ring, she felt a quiet sense of peace she hadn't known in years. It wasn't just the relief of recovering something precious. It was the unexpected warmth that came with Jake's presence. Every time she looked at the ring now, she also thought of his muddy hands, his easy smile, and that steady patience in his eyes. On the third morning, Clara was watering her garden when Jake called over the fence. "Hey, neighbor, you're up early again," she smiled, trying to make up for lost time. "My plants suffered while I was too busy worrying." He leaned on the fence, holding a mug of coffee. "They look happy now. You've got a gift for this." "Thanks. I guess it's my therapy," she replied softly. There was a brief silence, comfortable and calm. Then Jake said, "Listen, I was thinking. There's a small farmer's market by the lake this weekend. They have amazing coffee and the best lemon pie I've ever had. Want to go?" Clara hesitated for a moment. It had been so long since she'd gone anywhere like that, since she'd done something simply for herself. But the way Jake asked wasn't pushy. His tone was light, almost casual, but his eyes were warm and kind. "All right," she said finally. "That sounds nice." Jake's grin was instant. "Great, Saturday morning. I'll pick you up." When Saturday came, Clara found herself standing by the window, feeling oddly nervous. She hadn't worried about what to wear in years, but now she stood in front of her mirror, adjusting her sweater twice, fixing her hair even though it didn't really need fixing. She laughed softly at herself. It felt silly, but in a sweet way. Jake arrived exactly on time, his old pickup shining like he'd spent hours washing it. "You ready?" he asked with a smile that made her heart flutter just a little. The drive to the lake was filled with easy conversation. They talked about the changing weather, the small quirks of their neighborhood, even about the little girl next door who kept losing her cat. Jake told stories about his work designing solar systems for homes, and Clara shared how she used to work at the local library before she took early retirement. It all felt natural, like two people who had known each other far longer than they had. When they reached the market, the air was filled with the smell of baked bread and roasted coffee. People moved around in cheerful rhythm, greeting each other, children laughing as they ran between stalls. Jake bought 2 cups of coffee, handing one to Clara. "Told you," he said proudly. "Best in town." She took a sip and smiled. "You weren't wrong." They walked along the lakeside after exploring the stalls, the sun glinting on the water. Clara hadn't realized how beautiful autumn could look reflected on the waves. It reminded her that life, even after loss, still held color if one chose to see it. "You seem lighter," Jake said suddenly, watching her with gentle eyes. Clara looked at him. "I feel lighter." "I didn't expect that," he smiled. "That's good. You deserve to feel that way." For a moment their eyes met, and something unspoken passed between them. Not the rush of sudden attraction, but a quiet recognition. 2 hearts that had both known grief and still chose to show up. As they sat by the lake, a small band began playing nearby. The music was soft, nostalgic, an old tune that Clara used to love. Without thinking, Jake offered his hand. "May I have this dance?" She laughed. "Here, now?" "Why not?" he said, smiling like it was the most natural thing in the world. And so, under the morning sun, with a few strangers smiling nearby, Clara let him guide her gently into a slow dance. It wasn't perfect. She stepped on his shoe once and he chuckled, steadying her. But for the first time in a long while, she felt alive. The kind of alive that came from being seen, from being present, from realizing that maybe, just maybe, her heart wasn't done feeling after all. Later, when they returned home, Clara thanked him. "For today," she said softly. "For reminding me what it feels like to smile for no reason." Jake's expression softened. "You never needed a reason, Clara. You just needed someone to remind you it's okay." That night, Clara sat on her porch, the same place where she had cried weeks ago after losing her ring. The air was cool, the stars scattered like tiny lights in the dark. She held her ring between her fingers, thinking of Ethan, his laughter, his words, his warmth. Then she thought of Jake, the way he listened, the kindness in his eyes, the way he seemed to understand her silence without needing an explanation. She whispered into the quiet night, "I hope you don't mind, Ethan. I think someone's helping me heal." Across the yard, Jake's porch light flicked on. She smiled faintly, as if he had heard her from afar. The next morning, Jake showed up again, this time with a small brown box in his hands. "I was cleaning the garage," he said, "and found something that made me think of you." Inside was a small plant, a young magnolia tree. "You said your garden feels like your therapy," he explained. "Maybe this can be your new beginning." Clara touched the leaves gently, her heart swelling. "It's beautiful," she whispered. "Thank you, Jake," he smiled. "Just promise me you'll let me help you plant it." "You don't have to." "I want to," he interrupted softly. So they planted the magnolia together in her backyard, their hands brushing occasionally, their laughter echoing through the quiet afternoon. It wasn't romance in the loud, cinematic sense. It was simple, real, two people sharing small, meaningful moments. When they finished, Jake stood up, wiping his hands. "You know what I think?" he said, looking at the tiny tree swaying gently in the wind. "What?" Clara asked. "That this tree's going to outlive both of us, but it'll always remind me of this day." Her throat tightened at his words. She nodded, her voice barely a whisper. "It'll remind me too." As he left that evening, Clara watched him from the porch again, her fingers brushing the ring on her hand. It no longer felt like a symbol of only what she had lost, but also of what she had found, and deep down, she knew something had changed. Not just between her and Jake, but inside her heart. The world felt open again, and for the first time in a very long time, she was ready to see where life would take her next. The magnolia tree had grown a few inches since the day Clara and Jake planted it. Every morning she checked on it, watering the soil gently and watching its tiny leaves stretch toward the sun. It had become more than a plant to her. It was a symbol of everything that had changed. The quiet sadness that used to fill her mornings had softened. Now there was laughter sometimes, even hope, and behind much of that hope was Jake. In the weeks that followed, their friendship deepened naturally. They shared morning coffees on the porch, helped each other with small things, Clara lending him her garden tools, Jake fixing her leaky faucet, both pretending it was no big deal. But underneath those small gestures, something deeper was growing. One late afternoon, as the sun began to dip low and bathe the sky in orange, Jake showed up at Clara's door holding a small box. "Don't worry," he said with a smile. "No metal detectors or surprises this time." Clara laughed softly. "Then what's this?" "Just something I thought you'd like." She opened the box to find a delicate silver necklace with a small charm shaped like a magnolia flower. It was simple but beautiful. "Jake," she began, touched. "You didn't have to." "I know," he said. "But I wanted to. It reminded me of you, gentle but stronger than you think." For a moment, Clara couldn't speak. Her eyes stung, and all she managed to whisper was, "Thank you." Jake smiled quietly. "You've brought a lot of light to this street, you know. I don't think anyone's ever said that to you." That evening they sat outside together, sipping tea while the sky turned dark. The conversation came easily, drifting from memories to laughter to quiet silences that felt peaceful instead of empty. At one point, Jake looked at her and said softly, "You ever wonder if life gives us second chances when we least expect it?" Clara looked down at her ring, the one that had once symbolized forever. "I used to think those don't exist," she admitted. "But lately, I'm not so sure. A gentle breeze moved through the yard. Jake didn't press her to say more, and she was grateful for that. He simply sat there beside her, and in that silence, she felt something steady and safe, like life was slowly guiding her toward a new kind of peace. Days turned into weeks, and soon autumn began to fade into early winter. The air grew crisp, the trees bare, and the magnolia in her yard stood like a quiet promise of spring. Clara spent more time with Jake, helping him with a charity event his company was organizing. It wasn't grand or romantic in the usual sense. It was just two people sharing their days, finding joy in the ordinary. One snowy evening, Jake invited Clara over for dinner. His house was warm and filled with the smell of roasted chicken and herbs. Clara laughed when she saw the slightly burned bread. "You really went all out," she teased. "Hey, I never claimed to be a chef," Jake said, smiling. "But I'm improving." Dinner was simple but perfect. They talked, laughed, and for a while, Clara forgot the years of loneliness that had followed her loss. After dinner, they stood by the window, looking at the snow falling softly under the streetlights. The world outside was silent, peaceful. Jake spoke quietly. "You know, Clara, I didn't think I'd ever find someone who understood me again. But then I met you, and somehow everything feels different now." Clara's heart pounded softly. She met his gaze and saw the truth in it, gentle, honest, and kind. She didn't answer right away. Instead, she reached for his hand. Their fingers touched, and it felt natural, like the world had quietly led them to this moment. "I don't know where life is taking us," she said softly. "But I'm not afraid of it anymore." Jake smiled, his eyes warm. "Then maybe that's what matters most." They stood there, hand in hand, as snow continued to fall outside. No grand declarations, no promises, just a quiet understanding that two broken hearts had found their way toward healing, together. Over the next few months, their bond grew deeper. Jake never tried to fill Ethan's place, and Clara never asked him to. Instead, they created something entirely new, a friendship that slowly, gently became love. They still planted flowers together in spring, still shared morning coffee on the porch, still laughed over small things. One day, while watering the magnolia tree, Clara noticed it had begun to bloom. The first soft white flower opened under the sunlight, and she couldn't help but smile. She called out to Jake, who was fixing the fence nearby. "Look," she said, pointing to the bloom. He came over and stood beside her, smiling. "It's beautiful," Clara nodded. "You know, when we planted this, I didn't think I'd ever feel joy looking at something new again. But now, it feels like a beginning." Jake looked at her quietly. "It is a beginning," he said. "Yours. Ours. Life has a funny way of showing us that even after loss, something beautiful can still grow." Tears welled in Clara's eyes, but this time, they weren't from pain. She looked at him, smiling through them. "Thank you for reminding me how to live again." He reached out, gently brushing her hand. "You did that on your own, Clara. I just happened to be around." They laughed softly, standing together beneath the blooming magnolia, a tree that had once been just a symbol of hope, now a living reminder that healing wasn't about forgetting the past, but allowing love, in all its quiet forms, to return. That night, as Clara watched the sunset from her porch, she whispered, "I found it, Ethan, that peace you always wanted for me." Across the yard, Jake's porch light flicked on, and she smiled, knowing life had come full circle, not erasing what once was, but adding something new, something kind. The ring still shone on her hand, not as a memory of what she'd lost, but as a promise of what she'd found: strength, hope, and the courage to love again. And for Clara, that was enough, the end.